Before we begin this NBR Podcast episode, a warning. It is confronting. It discusses and details child sexual exploitation material. But it's important because of the issue: permanent name suppression. Why does the NBR care? Name suppression for business people is an ongoing issue closely followed by this publication. And in this case, a well-known business has managed to keep its identity secret so it is not linked to the crime. So, how can someone keep their name secret when they've downloaded thousands of files showing child sexual abuse, bestiality, and even child torture?
The victims themselves don't get anonymity, so their faces and their bodies, they are identifiable to the predators who are reenacting, reliving these rapes, these horrors, their tortures. Why should the perpetrator get anonymity when their own victims don't?
And then there's the speculation suppression leads to. What can you do when that leads to an AI chatbot naming you as the predator?
To be tied up to a crime like this is just abhorrent. Left to their own devices, the public will naturally speculate.
There is a recent law change to give victims a greater say. But how does that work when victims are in the digital world and have no presence in court? Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm Simon Shepherd. Let's start with this number, 1,032,683. That's how many attempts to view child sexual exploitation material were blocked by New Zealand internet filters in 2024. But the downloading carries on. This year, the Department of Internal Affairs, as at the end of October, had prosecuted 11 people. Since then, another conviction.
Former Deputy Police Commissioner Jevon McSkimming has pleaded guilty to possessing child sexual exploitation and bestiality material.
Of those 12 cases, one has permanent name suppression. Customs has also prosecuted 6 cases, and again, one has permanent name suppression. This episode follows on from NBR's reporting on that case. In August, a member of a wealthy family, a 46-year-old man, was granted permanent name suppression after pleading guilty to possessing 11,775 objectionable files. Here is an excerpt from the sentencing by Judge Maria Pekotic.
Some of what was captured can be described as involving sadistic sexual activity on children. There were images and videos of pubescent children being beaten and abused by adult males and females. Some of this included children being urinated on.
The man was jailed for 2 years, 5 months. His name was permanently suppressed, so was his family's name and business, and the submissions supporting the suppression orders. All we can say is the man had a history of mental health issues. So, to understand the process, we asked lawyer Sumudu Thode, Vice President of the Criminal Bar Association.
So under Section 200 of the Criminal Procedure Act, that's the section that judges look at for name suppression. And what the judges have to be satisfied of, or tick the box on, is that it causes extreme hardship to the person charged, so the defendant in court, or any other person connected with that person.
Okay.
So we're looking at extreme hardship, and in this particular case, the other section was endangers the safety of any person.
NBR provided Sumudu Thode the sentencing notes and suppression decision to analyse. How do the suppression thresholds apply to the man convicted?
So what the district court judge found was that extreme hardship to the person and other persons connected being his family and the business.
Yep.
And also in terms of endangering the safety of any person. So those are the sections and subsections the judge relied on in terms of saying this is what justifies permanent name suppression being granted in this particular case.
One other thing that was also suppressed in this case were the reasons and submissions for the name suppression. Is that unusual?
Not really, because if the reasons for the suppression gets released, you can put 2 and 2 together and usually figure out who it is. So, for example, if it's business, financial records or something like that, you can normally figure out which business it is. New Zealand's pretty small that way. In this case, the information or the evidence that was suppressed was medical documents and expert evidence along those lines. A lot of the time those things are really personal. So publishing that, even without the name, could put the person in danger. So it kind of defeats the purpose if you publish the reasons and then go, oh, but we're just not going to name the person.
Right, okay. So is the logic that you could still endanger their safety even if they are suppressed in terms of name but not suppressed in terms of reason? Absolutely.
If you go and, for example, name somebody's family member and say, oh, it's their husband or it's their wife, and that's not the case here, so I'm just giving a different example.
Yep.
Or you go and say, look, this person has a history of X, Y, Z happening to them in terms of, say, trauma, or talking about mental health, talking about addiction, all those sorts of things. Publishing that information, even without the name, would defeat the purpose of the court ordering suppression.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned mental health then. We can say that mental health did feature in this case because that was included in the sentencing notes from the judge. But I just wonder, is it hard for the public to understand why suppression is applied when those reasons and submissions are suppressed? People just start connecting 1 + 3 + 5 + 10 to figure out all sorts of answers.
Absolutely, but the reality is the judge who made the order would have all of this information, would have considered all of this information, and made a specific order that the evidence is also suppressed. So the evidence is not automatically suppressed just because somebody gets name suppression. This is a case where the judge specifically considered the evidence and decided to suppress it. So the public don't have the information as to why, nor do they have the legal expertise or know what the legislation says and, the thresholds that we've talked about. So the best person to make that decision is the judge, knowing what the information is and the impact of that. So I think the decision was made by the right person.
Okay. Like, you're a criminal defence lawyer and a vice president of the Criminal Bar Association. In your experience, is permanent name suppression common or uncommon?
Uncommon. The threshold is high for us to meet. The evidence that the court considers sometimes is voluminous. Mm-hmm. It is a difficult threshold to meet.
Okay. This name suppression was granted because the judge, as you said, met the threshold of extreme hardship and could endanger the safety of the defendant. But that decision has had unwanted ramifications for other people who have been wrongly named on social media as being the man involved. Is that one of the flaws of this system?
Yes, it is, because the problem is you have somebody saying, look, it's somebody from a famous family. And like I said, New Zealand is small. How many famous families would there be? And I think it's been reported that it was a male.
Yes.
So, every man from
46-year-old male. So, that's...
Yeah, that narrows it down probably to, not a handful, but, it narrows the pool down significantly. So if you are a 40-something-year-old man from a relatively wealthy family in New Zealand, everybody's going to go, well, was it you? Was it you? Was it you? Yeah. So it does cast suspicions on other people that may fall into that category. And actually that is one of the reasons why name suppression may not be granted. That's a factor that weighs against name suppression in the legislation, that it might cast suspicion on other innocent members of the public.
That is exactly what happened. Once the NBR broke the story about this case, the speculation began. And in an example of AI referencing itself, The Grok chatbot on X started answering questions on who the person was. Like this from user at SmashBros260, who asked,
"Who is the prominent New Zealand businessman with name suppression that has been charged with holding child exploitation material?"
Grok replied,
"The individual appears to be Wayne Wright Jr., a prominent businessman linked to the Wright Family Foundation and Best Start Childcare. However, due to permanent name suppression by New Zealand courts, this is based on public speculation and not officially confirmed."
Well, I'd have to say that the first moment when you called me, I thought it was a joke.
This is Wayne Wright Jr., and to be clear, he is not the man convicted of possessing objectionable material.
I reflected on that for a few minutes and called you back and determined that it was a real thing. I was aghast that I would be wrapped up in this. The profile of the chap who is convicted, he's, I think, at least 10 years younger than me, obviously incarcerated while I was driving around. And so it was reassuring to hear from you that you knew that it wasn't me, but we were just discussing the speculation, not the crime itself. And to be tied up to a crime like this is just abhorrent. I think that, left to their own devices, the public will naturally speculate on who might be involved in this sort of thing. And they'll land on folks who they're familiar with. And because I've had a little bit of a public profile in business, it seems logical that I would be one of the people they might land on. So, yes, I was very surprised. A small part of me might have been a bit bemused by it, but a larger part of me was appalled, really, that this sort of thing can happen.
What steps did you take about it? The fact that you had been named incorrectly by a Grok AI answer based basically on public speculation on X. What steps did you take about it?
Yes, well, I went on to Grok myself and queried Grok and indeed confirmed that Grok had the speculation. I think that the whole AI sphere is a fascinating place. I think it holds a lot of promise for human technology, but I was a little bit disappointed in this particular claim. I know on the internet, once people read it, they consider it to be the truth. And so that's a bit disturbing. I wrote to Mr. Elon Musk. He's the Grok AI is one of his endeavors. Mm-hmm. I wrote to him through his SpaceX company, never expecting a reply, of course.
Yep.
But I was a little bit heartened when a couple of weeks later, I went on to Grok AI, and it seems to have moved on from me as being its prime candidate. It didn't have any prime candidate, and somehow it had moved on. So perhaps there was a higher power there somewhere in the background pulling a string to fix this. I'll never know, of course.
No.
But, that was a little bit of relief.
But still, potential damage to your reputation.
Well, that's right. I had calls from a lot of friends and associates concerned for my welfare. They took it all quite seriously, asked if I was going to sue anybody or seek defamation damages. And I reflected on that and I thought, well, suing a robot or the world's wealthiest and one of its most powerful men seemed like a non-starter to me. So I just let it go. And as I said earlier, a small part of me is a bit bemused by this because I know it's false. Mm. And the people I care about and the people around me, my friends, family, colleagues, they know it's not me, so I can't take it too seriously. So I've just let it go. And then it was only recently that it got revived again. Revived
because the speculation continued. I was asked several times privately whether another well-known wealthy family was involved. And that speculation eventually spilled out onto social media and named Matt Mowbray, co-founder of Zuru, as the person. Again, incorrect. In a statement released to media at the time, the Mowbray family said,
"False rumours circulating on social media suggesting that Matt Mowbray is the businessman granted permanent name suppression for child sexual material offences are completely false, baseless and damaging. He firmly believes that individuals convicted of sexual offences against children should never receive name suppression."
What do you think about this name suppression situation?
Well, I've thought about that over the 2 months or so that it's been since this started. And where I've landed is that people like myself or Matt Mowbray, who was accused of this as well, we are most lucky, we're most fortunate to have access to platforms and personalities like yourself to be able to clear our name, to reset the public standard on information on what we may or may not have done. And we're lucky to have that kind of access. But for most people, if they're accused of something heinous like this in their local community, they don't have that kind of opportunity to clear their name. And it really breaks my heart that folks will be out there living with accusations that are unsubstantiated because of issues like this, where the guilty party their name is suppressed, and then the public or the community will land on somebody, and that somebody may be, have no connection to the crime. And I really feel for those folks who don't have that platform to be able to clear their name and set the record straight.
Of course, the victims we should care about most in this case are the children featured in the thousands of images and videos. We may not know who they are, but a long-time campaigner on this issue says that doesn't mean the impact is lessened. It's the opposite. Lawyer Denise Ritchie has been raising awareness for 29 years and is the founder of an organisation called Stop Demand.
We look at demand and supply. The material we're looking at has been supplied, who's fueling the demand, and that's the reason why I set up Stop Demand.
So you've had a window into this changing technology as well throughout almost 3 decades.
Yes, yeah. Unfortunately, I have to say.
Okay.
Yes.
As that technology has changed, how has the trade in child sex abuse material changed?
Well, in the early days, the operators were, I guess you could describe them more as lone wolves. Maybe they connected with small groups of like-minded people. But they were certainly, was seen as hidden and shameful. And over time now we've progressed to a point where it is so prolific. I don't think members of the public have any idea how widespread these crimes are. So what you have now is you've got, certainly with the development of the internet, the dark web, you've got encrypted messaging systems, you've got web browsers that can be anonymised, etc. And so you have private forums now where they are dedicated to seeking out material, seeking out new material, seeking out victims and new victims. And these have become very sophisticated private forums on the whole.
Yeah.
They are highly organised, really dedicated to their mission. They will coach others as to where to find children, how to take the material, how to get the material. And, of course, all of this is elevated because what was exciting to them a year ago no longer is. So you're getting acts of torture that you wouldn't have seen in the early days, and you're getting the ages of children now. In recent cases we've seen a lot involve toddlers, some even babies. So the material is becoming more vile, more extreme. So
the people who perpetrate this in terms of on the demand side, they're bringing it in, they're accessing it from online, This is the kind of material we're talking about, the digital files.
Yes.
If somebody gets convicted of this and they get granted permanent name suppression, what do you think about that?
We don't have an issue with temporary name suppression at the
while
outset.
justice system is going through the process.
Yes, because these are serious crimes to be accused of, and if you are innocent, well, it's a big thing.
Yep.
So, but when it comes to permanent name suppression, yes, we would strongly oppose name suppression for a whole bunch of reasons. These are crimes that operate in secrecy. And so unlike other crimes that we hear about and we see robberies and whatever, they're out there in the public eye. But these crimes thrive. They need secrecy and anonymity. And so the courts need to be lifting the veil on this. The other big thing is that the children, the victims themselves, don't get anonymity. So their faces and their bodies, they are identifiable to the predators who are reenacting, reliving these rapes, these horrors, their tortures. And they are able to be seen by countless men, and it is men. Why should the perpetrator get anonymity when their own victims don't? People need to understand that these crimes are they're quite unique, because in most crimes, including sex crimes, over time, the impact of that crime can tend to lessen a little bit. But in these crimes, it's the reverse, because after the children reach a certain age, bearing in mind these children are young very often, and it's not until they get cognitively older that they're able to understand what has happened to them, and then they live with the horror of knowing that their crimes are never ending. So instead of it just becoming a one-off incident of a rape, for example, or an act of torture against a child, the child is now aware that every day the potential for them to be re-raped in somebody's mind and in their fantasy, and that lives with them their entire life. And that's a very difficult thing for victims to be able to deal with. It's a very torturous journey that they've got to know they will never ever be free of this. And I do have with me a victim impact statement of she was 19 at the time she made this. Yeah. But she was raped for years by an uncle, and she was the subject of a series that was very popular in the early days. And she says now that at 19, my full understanding of what happened to me has only gotten clearer as I've gotten older. My life and my feelings are worse now because the crime has never really stopped and never really will. It is hard to describe what it feels like to know that at any moment, anywhere, where somewhere is looking at pictures of me as a little girl being abused and is getting some kind of sick enjoyment from it. It's like I'm being abused over and over and over again. The truth is I am being exploited and used every day and every night somewhere in the world by someone, and how can I get over this when this crime won't end? And she refers to herself as having to live a double life, because she talks about that there is another little me that's on the internet and will never not be on the internet. That's a burden for these children, and I think the courts, the judges, they need to get a real sense of the gravity of the impact of these crimes on the victims.
When it comes to permanent name suppression in sexual violence cases, there has been a recent amendment to the law. From November this year, permanent name suppression cannot be granted unless the victim agrees. But there's an obvious problem when the victim or victims are unknown. So let's go back to Sumudu Thode from the Criminal Bar Association.
That's a flaw in the amended name suppression laws, because if there is an identifiable victim, then they have a voice to say whether or not suppression should be granted. But in a case like this, like you say, it's the number of victims. Some of them may not be identifiable because of, you can't say, well, that's so-and-so. Yeah. It may be that there's only certain body parts that can be seen in a picture or video, so you can't say that's that person. Yeah. Even if you can see people, you might not be able to locate them. Some of them are overseas, you need to take into account age, all of that. So you can't get victim views in a case like this. I guess who advocates for them, that would be for the prosecution. Yep. To raise that as a factor that either favours or not name suppression. Yep.
But is it also up to the judge to say, look, there is no identifiable victim here, so therefore I have to take that into consideration in regards to permanent name suppression?
Absolutely. And then it gets complicated, say, if there are identifiable victims and 2 says yes to name suppression and 2 says no. Right. Then, which way do you go then? So that's something that hasn't been tested since the law's been changed.
And you haven't been in favour of this particular law change, is that correct?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Because I think it's these difficulties, and like I said, the judge has all of the information that needs to be considered. The judge is aware of the law, aware of other cases, and the victims are not privy to that information. Okay. So making that decision without all of the information, without the legislative framework, I think can lead to significant difficulties.
And here's Denise Ritchie from Stop Demand with her view.
That is the weakness in these cases, and at the time of sentencing. There needs really to be a victim advocate that would speak on behalf and to be able to put some material like this before the courts, because otherwise you're just reliant on the prosecutor, and they may have a busy workload. They may not be really up to date with the extent of the damage to victims, and then it's up to the judges to have got their own level of understanding as well to be able to apply an appropriate sentence.
So what happens now in the case of the 46-year-old man jailed over 11,775 videos and images and granted permanent name suppression? Customs, who prosecuted him, is appealing the ruling. Wainwright Jr., who was wrongly named on X, is helping.
I was contacted by Crown Law recently because they're familiar with the accusations that have been levelled against me. And they asked if I would be willing to supply a testimony, an affidavit of how this has affected me. And I've agreed to help Crown Law with that. Because it's an issue before the courts, I can't divulge the contents of my affidavit, but I can say that I'm doing my part to try and assist Crown Law to seek a reversal of this name suppression order, so that the public can be informed on who did this thing.
What's the best outcome in this for you?
Well, the best outcome is clarity on who did this crime, and for the community to be fully aware of that. I mean, my name is forever locked into the internet now, and I'll just have to cross that bridge when I get to it if it comes back to haunt me. There's nothing that can be done about that. But hopefully no one else has to go through this, what Matt and I have had to go through. And I think the best outcome is that in the long term, the courts apply a much higher bar to allowing name suppression. And I think that the victims of the crime should have a major role in determining whether or not the assailant has that right to name suppression.
And finally, Denise Ritchie from Stop Demand has a message for the family of the man.
My plea to the family, if they're watching this, is please put your personal interest to one side and think about the interests of the other three levels of people, and particularly the children. This is not your shame. It is not your offending. If people can separate out and say, we will love on our family member, we will support them, but we will not hide behind that to put our business interests ahead of the rights of victims. I mean, people have a reputation, but that's different to character. And I would appeal to their character to say, actually, we will do this as a family. We will stand for the victims instead of thinking about our own business interest. And I think they would get a lot of respect, because in the end, people, including me, know who they are anyway. So it's a small country and it's very difficult to really have full name suppression.
The High Court appeal is set down for next week. If there are any developments, we'll update you at nbr.co.nz. That wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. As usual, social clips used are listed in the description, and many thanks to senior content producer Joseph Hisayasu. Remember, your subscription means we can bring you the news without the influence of advertising or government funding at nbr.co.nz.